Well, Steve, I know that everyone felt yesterday that Gerald Ford had ruled himself out. But as of now, Ronald Reagan's #1 choice for vice president is still Gerald Ford. I just ran over here. I'm a little out of breath.
I know you are.
And he is still, as of now, trying to talk Gerald Ford into it. So that it may be that the vice presidential candidate in the Republican Party is not George Bush or any of the others, but still, Gerald Ford is the man Reagan is wanting to persuade.
According to your information, a specific offer has been made?
Not any specific offers. There were meetings that took place the day before yesterday, and for all I know, they went way up into the early hours of the morning, with Reagan and Reagan's people trying to convince Ford and his people that Ford should be the man. And the final decision has still not yet been made.
Thank you, Barbara. Our political director, Hal Bruno, is down on the floor this morning. Hal, if we got this so-called dream ticket, it would seem to me it would have one basic liability, and that would be age.
Age would be the big problem in this one because age factor is something that Reagan's going to have to confront in the September and the fall campaign. The Republicans were easy on him. The Democrats aren't going to be. And when you have a ticket with a 70-year-old man and a 67-year-old man, that poses some sort of a problem in many voters' minds.
What do you think about all the Bush talk we've been hearing? Where does that stand at this point?
Well, again, I'm interested in Barbara's latest information, and there's nothing that I know that could disprove it. However, we do keep hearing that George Bush is also the favored choice. I was told late last night that it was about 90% certain. There were some problems there. The main problem being that Mr. and Mrs. Reagan, Governor and Mrs. Reagan, both have some personal antipathy toward George Bush, and that those who were pushing Bush were trying to overcome that problem.
One other question, Hal. Are we getting into a situation here where the right may give Reagan problems if we get a Ford or a Bush?
I think you'll find some elements of the far right that will make a lot of noise, but I think that's the only problem we'll have. I think the presidential candidate is totally free to choose anybody he wants, and 95% of this convention will go along with it.
Although Ronald Reagan will not officially receive the Republican presidential nomination until tonight, several hours from now, for several months he has been concentrating on his campaign for the November election. Today, Mr. Reagan made a surprise campaign stop. He had lunch with some Republican leaders at the Polish-American Century Club. Some of the possible vice presidential candidates were along with him, including George Bush, New York Congressman Jack Kemp, also President, retired General Alexander Haig, and Texas Senator John Tower. They ate some traditional Polish food, kielbasa, things like that. Then Reagan talked about the contributions that Polish Americans have made to the United States. Crowds inside and outside the club were very enthusiastic today. Reagan then went on to pick up his wife Nancy at a meeting of Republican wives. Later, Mr. Reagan made a brief appearance here at Joe Louis Arena. Channel 7's Ben Marshall was near Detroit Metropolitan Airport when the storm hit earlier today, and he was at a Bush political meeting when all of that activity took place. Ben has his report now.
Daylight turned to darkness as the storm hit. The driving rain and roaring winds swept through the area with tremendous force, leveling a couple of new walls that had just been put up on a section that is being added to the Hilton Inn. I was in a meeting of the Michigan delegation when the storm struck. George Bush had just released his delegates when the lights went out. Hotel personnel did a super job, immediately bringing in candles and moving guests away from windows. As I walked out into the lobby, I saw a canopy out front being ripped away by the winds. Just about all of us here thought we were in the middle of a tornado. As the Michigan delegates chanted, "We want Bush," their candidates stepped before them to urge that they work just as enthusiastically for Ronald Reagan as they had for him. Bush called for a total effort aimed at a Republican victory in November.
Of course we have differences on individual issues, strongly felt convictions, and that's what's wrong with that. Day I find somebody that agrees with me 100% of the time, I'm going to give him one of those fishy-eyed looks and see what's the matter with him, because we are individuals, and we have this great adherence to individual freedom and conviction, which is right. But what I'm saying is that I enthusiastically, not just do it, but enthusiastically want to do what I said I'd do. And I've met with each delegation, And I am encouraging everybody to enthusiastically, positively get out and work for our ticket.
So the Michigan Bush delegates are released, liberated, as Bush put it, to vote for, well, who's left? Ronald Reagan, I believe. From the Hilton Inn in Romulus, Ben Marshall, Channel 7 Action News, reporting.
From the Republican Convention City, Detroit, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings in London, Max Robinson in Detroit, and from our convention anchor booth, Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. Tonight, the Republicans will do what everybody has known for months they would do on this date, formally nominate Ronald Reagan as the GOP's candidate for President of the United States. Before that moment arrives, however, there will be a number of speeches, including the keynote address by Congressman Guy Vanderjagt of Michigan, who was supposed to talk last night, but because the convention fell way behind schedule, had his moment in the limelight postponed until this evening. George Bush will also speak tonight, and if, as the Reagan inner circle insists, Reagan has still not decided on a running mate, the Bush performance may help him make up his mind. Once again today, the number 2 spot on the ticket was the prime topic of conversation here, mainly because there is really nothing else to talk about. Here's a report on Reagan's Day from Barry Seraphin.
Reagan went to the podium in the convention hall today, but it was only a run-through in preparation for the real thing tomorrow night, when he will deliver his acceptance speech. But as he joked and tested the microphone, the question was not so much what he will say tomorrow night, but what he will decide tonight about a running mate. He was said to have made another effort through emissaries to interest former President Ford in the job. But earlier today, as he arrived for a luncheon in the suburb of Hamtramck, Reagan insisted there had been no offer to Mr. Ford and that the former president had made his lack of interest known several weeks ago.
Well, his last statement was rather definite to me about it out in Palm Springs, but...
Look sure you have no second choice.
What?
No second choice.
I'm trying to get to a first choice. Thank you. Thank you.
The luncheon, held at a Polish-American club, was a thank you affair for Reagan's caucus teams, which have worked with the various delegations at the convention. Reagan sat at a table between 2 of those who had been in the running for the second spot on the ticket, an accidentally symbolic arrangement with Jack Kemp on his right and George Bush on his left. Despite the increasing speculation that Bush is the favorite among the vice presidential contenders, Reagan left, still saying no one was ruled out at this point.
I haven't ruled anyone out.
Like Reagan, Mr. Ford today referred reporters back to his earlier statements of disinterest in the vice presidency.
My opinion now is as it has been for the last 6 weeks, and I have no reason whatsoever to change my mind.
Reagan this evening was to put in an appearance here at an Hispanic reception, but he canceled that and another scheduled appearance before a group of young Republicans because the spokesman said he wanted to stay in his suite to try to resolve the question of a running mate, taking time out to watch on television as the convention finally and formally nominates him for the top of the ticket. The decision on the vice presidential candidate will ultimately be Reagan's, but some of those close to him say that if, as expected, nothing comes of the Ford talk, many of those around him will urge him to choose George Bush. Barry Seraphin, ABC News, at the Reagan Headquarters Hotel.
This is Susan King. George Bush was followed by 2 storms today. The one outside, which he couldn't avoid, destroyed part of the hotel where he was continuing his Reagan policy supercell, the state delegation. Today, that was done by candlelight. The other storm was an emotional one within the Reagan camp, surrounding the idea of Bush as vice president.
Governor Reagan's position, I know he feels as strongly on this point as you and I do. And so in conclusion, I look under Governor Reagan for a foreign policy that will restore respect.
Bush may have forgotten his issue differences with Reagan, which he used to outline day after day on the campaign trail. But Ronald Reagan has not. And sources tell ABC News that although top advisors insist Bush, who has been greeting enthusiastic audiences in Detroit, would be the best vice presidential candidate, Reagan is reluctant to go with him. There is also a storm surrounding the personal chemistry between the Reagan and Bush families. Reagan may have given George Bush a seat of honor at his left during lunch today, but there was no hiding the tension. Bush appeared eager to please, listening to Reagan's stories between munches of Polish sausage. But the two have never developed a real friendship, and the relationship between their wives is strained. With Reagan's decision now only hours away, Bush is sidestepping reporters' questions and possible mistakes.
Come on, you guys, you get so much people.
While Bush is preparing for a speech to the convention tonight, his staff is making preparations in the event that he will be making an acceptance speech tomorrow and have reporters trailing him as Reagan's running mate on Friday. Susan King, ABC News, Detroit.
Max, I'm here with former Governor George Romney of Michigan and another good friend of Mr. Ford. Governor Romney, what do you think the convention could do to convince Mr. Ford to take this second spot?
Draft him, pass a resolution indicating that the delegates at this convention want him to serve as Vice President of the United States.
Well, are you doing anything active to get that underway?
Oh, sure. I suggested it yesterday morning, and I'm absolutely amazed at the extent to which support has developed through this convention.
Well, are you going to collect signatures? How are you going to get this draft manifested?
A resolution from the floor tonight to draft him.
Will you offer it?
No, but I know those who are preparing it.
Congressman Baumann, at this meeting you had with Governor Reagan yesterday, was any mention made of President Ford and any kind of arrangement that he was seeking with him?
At the end of the conversation, it's my recall that after a thorough discussion of the other candidates, including George Bush for the Maine, I believe it was Governor Reagan himself, he said, "What do you think about Gerald Ford?" in a very non-committal manner, and the consensus was, "Oh, that would be a dream ticket." I quite frankly didn't join in the comments, but that was the other participants' view. And Governor Reagan was encouraged to ask Ford whether he would serve at a meeting that he told us he would be having with Ford later in the afternoon.
Well, now, do you believe all of this that's circulating around today, that Governor Reagan could make any kind of an arrangement that would be satisfactory both to you and to the spirit of politics for an offer for the vice presidency?
I don't think former President Ford, former Vice President Ford, could make any conditions on his service on this ticket. He would have to accept the vice presidency for what it is. He would serve on the ticket at the pleasure of potentially President Reagan. And for him to set conditions would be totally inappropriate in my mind. He would help the ticket if he would accept it without any strings attached. But if he's going to start tying strings to it, I think people better think twice about what kind of arrangements being made.
Could this be a big smoke screen to prepare the delegates for George Bush?
That's hard to say. There's been so much speculation here, but I think a lot of delegates would prefer President Ford as vice president rather than George Bush.
One quick question. What is going to happen with Senator Helms on the vice president?
If Bush is the potential nominee, I have no question in my mind that Senator Helms will be nominated and put before the convention and voted upon.
Thank you very much. Senator Helms, a quick question. Hello there. How are you? Listen, if former President Ford were to be picked by Governor Reagan, would you still put your name in contention for vice president?
I think not. I would have to consult with the folks who have done the work, Senator, but I wouldn't see any point in it because I like Jerry Ford, and indeed I campaigned for him in '76 after he defeated Reagan in the convention in Kansas City.
Do you think there's any reality to all these rumors that are going around? Or
it's difficult for me to imagine this scenario, but after the past 10 years, I suppose you and I ought not to be surprised about anything.
All right. You probably know that former President Ford suggested an open door policy. There might be conditions. Do you think that nominee Reagan can grant those conditions?
Well, it depends on what they are. If I can't believe that Jerry Ford would ask Ronald Reagan to give up the family jewels, you know. But I believe they could come to a meeting of the minds about responsibilities. And if Ford is saying, for example, President Reagan, I want to be able to have access to you and discuss foreign policy matters, economic matters, and so forth, I think Reagan would readily say, okay.
Yeah, but all presidents promise, you know, John Nance Garner said it wasn't worth a pitcher of warm spit. Does it ever conceive to you, does it seem possible to you that'll ever change?
Oh, I think Garner was wrong about that. The potential of the office of vice president, if the president of the Senate, which the vice president is under the Constitution, if he pursues what his responsibility is, it's a tremendously important job potentially. Now, I wish the public would disabuse its mind of this feeling that the vice presidency is not important. It's unimportant as long as the vice president is a political surrogate, goes around cutting ribbons and that sort of thing. But if he would sit there in the Senate and preside over the Senate and make some of those decisions, which are now made by the majority leader alone, it could have a tremendous influence.
Have you discussed any of this with Governor Reagan? And what was your last meeting? What did you discuss?
Well, as you may know, we have an independent effort going on in North Carolina. The law forbids me to consult with him, and it's been an awkward situation. I've had to sort of talk indirectly with Paul Laxalt and hope that he would pass along, and I think the messages have gotten through all right. But
what were they?
Well, you know, about the importance of the vice presidency, such as you mentioned. But I got to say to you that I've had no contact with him because it would be violative of the law if I had.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen?
Well, you know, Ted, there you see in Senator Helms' comments the triumph of political reality over ideology, because he is talking about supporting a man who is opposed to the things that he has made the litmus test of acceptability, the Panama Canal.
The SALT Treaty.
The SALT Treaty, and the language of the platform on abortion and on judicial selection.
Frank, you know what I find fascinating about this whole discussion that's going on here this evening? What now if it doesn't happen?
Yeah.
All the excitement is being raised now for the vice presidency of a former president, something historical, something has never happened before. And if it doesn't happen now, we face this extraordinary situation where almost no matter whom Governor Reagan nominates, it's going to be a letdown for this convention.
Sure, and he's going to be known as the second best, the man that the convention really did not want, and that Reagan picked him because he couldn't get Gerald Ford. They're into kind of a tough situation here. I don't know whether they're going to be able to work it out just yet.
Ted, the information that I have is that as recently as a few hours ago, the principals involved in this delicate negotiation were in fact in delicate negotiations, and the negotiations were about an enhanced vice presidential office, meaning an enhanced responsibility that might include a formalized understanding that would give Gerald Ford unprecedented responsibility for at least coordinating, and of course it remains to be seen what all that would involve, the national security apparatus.
George, when you say that they've been in contact, you mean through intermediaries or direct contact? It's Ford and Reagan?
I can't say for certain. My impression is that it's the two gentlemen and some others.
George, it almost seems as though these two men have mousetrapped not only one another, but themselves. How do they get off this? If for some reason Reagan doesn't want to do it, or Ford decides that he doesn't want to do it, can they get out of it again?
That's an excellent question. These gentlemen were locked in combat, a competition of sorts 4 years ago in Kansas City. They're in a kind of competition now. The convention, as you rightly say, is sky high over the prospect that it would obviously welcome of a Ford vice presidency. Therefore, if this fish gets away, if Reagan is truly trying to land this fish, then the convention will suffer a tremendous letdown, and anyone who comes next will be considered clearly a second choice. Ford, on the other hand, having toured the country, saying repeatedly that all private considerations must be subsumed under the primary goal of ridding the country of Jimmy Carter, and having begun, as it is my understanding that he has begun, something like negotiations, is going to find it very hard, logically or psychologically, to pull back.
So it almost seems as though we are going to have a Ford vice presidency one way or another. George, thank you very much for being with us now. We look forward to talking to you a little.
Frank, I was just downstairs beneath the platform, and I spoke with George Bush, who's waiting to go on, as it were. And I asked him if after he were finished, he'd like to come up and talk to us. He said, no thanks. I think I'll assume a low profile which is appropriate to a private citizen. And then he said, it looks like it's all set. And I said, what? And he said, the vice presidency. He seemed rather shaken by it, as a matter of fact, rather bitter. And he closed by saying again, it looks like it's all set. Frank?
Thank you, Jim. There have been reports that people would be notified. The also-rans, to use a rather harsh term, but nevertheless the people who have not been chosen, would be notified by telephone tonight, and perhaps Congressman or former Congressman Bush already has been told that it is indeed all set.
You can see Nancy Reagan now in that red dress entering the hall, and you can imagine what that will do to the delegates on the floor. And they're
Nancy Kissinger.
No, I don't think that is Nancy Kissinger. I was looking at her. I thought it was too. California, here I come. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my Lord. Mrs. Reagan fell to the floor. She's being held up. Well, she looks all right. She's smiling, greeting her grandson. There's her son, Michael, at her right hand. And Maureen, her stepdaughter, was... I think all of us feel the same way. As this demonstration now for Mrs. Reagan continues, let's go down to the floor of the convention and Max Robinson. Max?
We're with Congressman Mickey Edwards from Oklahoma. Congressman Edwards, I understand you have heard that, in fact, Gerald Ford will be on the ticket with Ronald Reagan.
I'm pretty certain of it. I have not had official confirmation from the governor, but I believe that that's what will happen.
What makes you so certain of it?
Well, I've been talking to a number of the people in the organization, on the inner staff. We all pretty well are convinced now from what we've heard. I can't confirm any more than that, but I'd say I've heard it from enough sources. I'd put money on it.
Thank you very much.
Congressman Bob Bauman of Maryland, you've heard the report. What do you hear about it?
I'm sure, as I can be, that unless there's a last-minute hitch, it's going to be Gerald Ford for vice president. And as one who is very concerned about any conditions that might be imposed on his running, I'm also reasonably certain that despite public statements, there will be no conditions.
Could you tell us what conditions you heard were being asked?
Well, I understand that there have been extensive discussions about roles to be played, what precisely might be entailed in the office as envisioned under this Reagan-Ford ticket, and that despite that, whatever is said publicly, I'm reasonably confident that Ronald Reagan is going to be the president without question.
Did you hear a deal has been struck or almost struck?
I think it's done.
Thank you very much. I must add one other thing. That Senator Helms, I asked a question to a moment ago. He paused. I said, "You hear my question?" He said, "Yes. I just want to wait for a few minutes before I answer."
Join the bandwagon. You're all welcome. Let's make America great again. Mr. Chairman, my fellow delegates, it is now my great honor and privilege to nominate the next president of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
For this moment, huh? There they go. They formed a actual procession now. It's kind of a really old-fashioned political demonstration. They're going to win their way through the aisles.
Well, that's going to go for a while, Frank. It sounds very much the way it did at Madison Square Garden 4 years ago, except this time the Reagan supporters really have something to cheer about.
And it's a bit louder, too. They're really roaring, and
they've got the horns, and they just keep up that constant howling sound, the whining sound. And of course, all the posters out there are for Reagan, and at the moment, Reagan alone. You don't see any vice presidential posters, and I kind of suspect, even though they had vice presidential posters ready for Kemp and they had them ready for Bush, I don't think they had them ready for Jerry Ford.
They probably had some ready for quite a few others, too.
There are more people in the hall tonight, Frank, than on any other occasion during this Certainly during this 1980 Republican convention, it is filled literally, when you say up to the rafters. I'm looking up right now, and the rafters are filled.
Except for just a very small place behind the podium there, where there is nobody, but that's simply because you couldn't see anything from there.
That's true, and I think also for security reasons. Let's go now to Susan King, who just spoke a few minutes ago to George Bush. Susan?
Well, Ted, George just arrived back here at the Pontchartrain, which is the hotel where he's been holding up. And, of course, we immediately went over to talk to him, and he went into the bar for a quick few beers. He was thirsty. He insists that there is no word to him, no direct or indirect word to him, that a deal has been struck. He said the talk behind the podium was such that Reagan and Mr. Ford will be meeting, and there might be some picture taken, but he said no one has told him directly or indirectly that he is no longer a candidate as vice president. His wife returned a few minutes before him, and she said she didn't know what was going on. She had no idea if anything had come of it. He then was asked how he felt at this moment. He's been pretty friendly. He seems a little shell-shocked, I must admit, and he used the old line about Bo Derek. He said, I feel about a 7 on a scale of 10. Ted, Frank?
Thank you, Susan. It should be pointed out, indeed, it does appear that a deal has not yet been finalized. I don't think the T's have been crossed or the I's dotted. In fact, even now, somewhere here in this great hall where the demonstration is still in progress, former President Ford is meeting with 2 of his advisors from a previous administration, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and Alan Greenspan, the former, was he the chairman of his economic advisors?
Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. We understand, too, Ted, that at the Reagan headquarters, which is in the Plaza Hotel here in Detroit, there will be a briefing in about 15 minutes or so, and maybe by then we'll have a little more hard, official type confirmation.
Frank, let's go down to the floor itself now, and our correspondent, Lynn Sherr. Go, Lynn.
We have now heard from Senator Richard Schweiker of Pennsylvania, who was Ronald Reagan's running mate the last time, that indeed it will be Gerald Ford as the vice president. Senator Schweiker says he got it from someone who heard it from Senator Laxalt. That's the senator from Nevada who is just up there speaking and who occasioned this very noisy demonstration. Once again, Senator Schweiker telling us that Senator Laxalt told someone else, who then told Senator Schweiker that Gerald Ford will be Ronald Reagan's running mate. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much. Boy, it must be something to be down there in the midst of all that. You know, I don't know that I've seen one like this, Ted, since the Goldwater demonstration in '64. We understand that a motorcade is in the process of being formed at the Reagan headquarters at the Plaza. So that is another indication that Governor Reagan plans to come here tonight.
Those balloons we were telling you about a moment ago, 12,000 of them, they're stuck.
There you are.
That's spontaneous.
We were so certain that the balloons were coming down. We understand that this is getting ludicrous, but there is a worker up there trying to free the balloons so that they will come down. I don't know if he can get a knife or something to slash away at the net.
Well, I hope he doesn't get too caught up in the idea.
Look out. Here they
come. All right. Red, white, and blue. And it is still a stirring sight, though, isn't it? To see all these balloons come down on these cheering delegates. It is not altogether incidental that the television cameras are here to record it, but it's also a marvelous occasion for the delegates who are here. And they're popping the balloons by the thousands. On the floor, but I don't think there's any rancor in those boos, although Mr. Anderson is apparently... Whoops.
Well, now they've just heard it, you see.
Yes, that's right.
Formal announcement. Yeah, a little more than just a few boos.
A little lustier, yes.
Mr. Chairman, the great state of Michigan cast.
Although I think that these Republicans know that if in fact the Anderson campaign gains more momentum, that the chances are that it will take more away from the Carter candidacy than from the Reagan-Ford candidacy, if indeed it is going to be a Reagan-Ford ticket.
Reagan, 67.
I have just been informed by a voice in my ear that
not voting.
Mr. Ford and Governor Reagan are meeting right now. I wonder if our correspondent Barry Seraphin has heard anything like that. Obviously, that wasn't made known to anybody at the Reagan headquarters just a short while ago.
The vote at this time
which makes Governor Reagan the nominee of our party. 20 votes for Governor Reagan.
There it is. The Big Sky Country does it for Governor Reagan. He goes over the 998 total.
That was Louise Ball, who is the delegation chairman of Montana. She enters the history books as the one to announce the vote that puts it over the top.
And here comes another demonstration, waving the American flags.
Oh, here we are.
That's Michael Reagan, oldest son. Young Ronald, whom we met before, sitting between his mother and father. And Governor Reagan looking appropriately pleased.
His daughter-in-law is to his immediate right, the wife of his son, Michael. Well, I'll tell you, he's not meeting with Ford at this moment, as we said minutes ago. We now have proof of that.
Unless, as someone once pointed out in a different context, he's crouching.
Yes. I hope you'll forgive us for, at times, maybe giving you information that is not all that soundly based. We would like to have everything confirmed, too, but this is a breaking, developing story that we have here tonight, and sometimes one event overturns another prediction or projection, but we have had all sorts of people all over this city and certainly all over this convention hall tonight telling us that the ticket is going to be Reagan and Ford. Last word we had, the deal had not been finally cemented.
Yes, a few minutes ago, a horde of journalists ran by, and I saw two of Reagan's top aides, Governor Reagan's top aides. The curious thing about this is that the security is not very tight here. For a while, they had roped the area off, and they weren't letting anyone through, and then they let more people drift through. And now people are walking all over the place, but we still expect him. We haven't seen him, but we understand he's on his way down here through the lobby.
Thank you, Royal. Maybe there's a back door.
I was about to say, Frank, you've been over at that Renaissance Plaza as I have, and in that hotel. It has more ways in and more ways out than almost any hotel I've ever seen. So I wouldn't be too worried about the fact that there's no sign of security in that central area.
It was, I believe it was Saturday night. Mr. Ford is staying there, too, and there was a birthday party for Mr. Ford. A huge crowd gathered at the main entrance, and all sorts of security people standing around, you know, with the earplugs in their ear, and all of a sudden it became apparent that Mr. Ford had gone out another entrance, and he was whisked away.
Well, this demonstration has been going now for roughly 25 minutes, and a new surge of energy seemed to go through the demonstrators a moment ago. I don't know what it is, but I suspect one of our floor correspondents will find out pretty soon, and when we know, we'll tell you all about it. Things are still very quiet on the platform itself. As we've been telling you now a couple of times and from a couple of different locations, we are vamping, they are vamping, we are waiting for Governor Reagan of California to come over here. And then, as James Wooten told you a moment ago, he'll be taken to a holding area just below the platform, and the remaining formalities of this convention will proceed, and then finally he'll be brought before the convention itself. Frank?
But there is growing reason to believe, I think, Ted, increasing reason to believe that he will not say anything about his vice presidential selection. Tom Gerald just talked with Susan Ford, who said she received a call from her mother. And her mother said, if there is to be any announcement, it will come tomorrow.
Conte was talking as a close friend of the family. Sandy Van Ocker is down on the floor right now. Sandy, what have you learned?
Ted, I don't know if you can see me, but I'll tell you what Senator Laxalt has told us. Senator Laxalt, who is very close to Ronald Reagan, says that Ronald Reagan has selected George Bush. I repeat, Senator Laxalt has picked George Bush. I'll try to get in on the conversation now.
How do you think he felt?
I couldn't tell.
How do you feel, sir?
Listen, this is Ron Reagan's decision. I've felt all along that once he made that decision, I'd go with it. I've indicated frequently that everybody on the list was acceptable to me, and I am acceptable to the Bush candidacy.
You think this convention is going to be disappointed now after all of the talk about President Ford?
There'll be some of that. Sure there will be. Hey, just a second. Wait a second.
Well, you heard it.
Right. That's Senator Laxalt leaving the hall right now. I'm trying to find if I'm still on camera. Am I still on the air?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
It's very hectic and very confused, but Senator Laxalt said that Ronald Reagan has selected George Bush. Ted, I'm down with Congressman Bob Bauman of Maryland, and he is a well-known conservative in the House of Representatives, and I'd like to get your reaction to Senator Laxalt just announcing that Ronald Reagan has selected George Bush.
Well, it certainly wouldn't be my first choice, and I think a lot of conservatives here will be very disappointed. In the absence of some rather strong statements by Mr. Bush changing past positions, I would very much expect that Senator Helms will be nominated for vice president tomorrow.
You told me before that that Mr. Bush would have to make some mollifying statements on abortion and ERA, both of which he's endorsed. Would that make him acceptable to you if he would do that?
Well, we'll see what he has to say. Until a few moments ago, we were informed that Mr. Ford was the nominee. Let's wait an hour or two. Perhaps we'll have another vice presidential nominee at the rate it's moving.
You're right. And if it remains the same, will you nominate Jesse Helms? I know he's asked you to.
Well, I'll make that decision sometime between now and tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen.
All right, Sandy, here's the Reagan motorcade now moving through the streets of Detroit. They don't have very far to go before the governor's entourage will arrive here at the Joe Louis Arena. And then I assume it won't take very long for him to make his way up to the podium. And these rather weary demonstrators can finally put down their placards, although, of course, the sight of him, they're going to go crazy all over again. Well, I don't know, Ted. I don't know. Boy, oh boy, what an evening.
It looks as though Mr. Ford will be able to keep that radio appointment after all.
And with good reason, and I certainly have no reason at all to doubt now. I think we've got it about as firm as we can. Susan told us that they're cheering up there at the Bush headquarters, that Mrs. Bush told her the call came, and Governor Reagan has selected George Bush to be the nominee after letting the people of the United States throughout this long evening believe that he was, if not moving in the direction of Gerald, if not completely settled on the selection of Gerald Ford, he was certainly moving in that direction.
Well, I don't think that they were misleading us, Frank. I think what's been going on here all evening has been an entire evening of negotiations between Reagan's people and Ford's people. And indeed, I've just been handed a piece of information that says George Bush will be nominated as Ronald Reagan's presidential nomination because, and this is a quote, an incredible hang-up developed between Reagan and former President Gerald Ford. Well, now there is Reagan just about to enter the Joe Louis Arena. Who's, I guess that's Paul Laxalt.
Paul Laxalt embracing Mrs. Reagan, yes. Well, I think that, that's probably true. And I just can't believe that that's terribly helpful to the image the Republicans want to project here. They've been talking about party unity and together a new beginning. The country has sat here tonight believing that they really were coming together with Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan. Past opponents, really, very vigorous opponents, burying the hatchet, coming together, deciding to join forces in an unprecedented thing and have Gerald Ford, a former president, become a candidate for vice president, and now all of a sudden it falls apart.
I don't know what happened.
Frank, I'm sure they'll paper it over, but as you say, it is a setback to this image of party unity that the Republicans have been trying to project for the last 3 days and that they hope to take with them into this campaign for the presidency against Jimmy Carter. Right now, because George Will has been on top of this story all evening long and is standing by now. George, apparently there were some demands that simply couldn't be met. Is that right? George, can you hear me?
I was told shortly, minutes before the announcement of Bush was made, by some extremely worried Reagan people who are over here in the hall, that demands had been put in front of Governor Reagan by the Ford people that were, to begin with, of dubious constitutionality, perhaps, certainly politically unacceptable, in that it would have been a crippled and perhaps ridiculous presidency, and one that he simply couldn't accept. It was that 5 demands had been made. I don't know them all, but the story I was told, and these were passionate and angry people at the time, were that he was asked to give to Ford the right not to veto and not to advise on, but actually the right to appoint Treasury Secretary, Secretary of State, Defense and OMB, that is war and money, which is the heart of course, the executive responsibility. And the danger was that there would have been, had this got out, there would have been the assumption that this was going to bring Dr. Kissinger back, indeed that Dr. Kissinger was behind it, and this might have provoked a tremendous bloodbath in this hall.
Well, George, it sounds as though instead of having this theme of togetherness that the Republicans thought they were going to have, there is now a considerable disunity within 2 of the most powerful people within the party.
Well, I think it might be best to say if what I was told is true, and I want to say that you know how passionate people get around midnight in these situations, but if it's true, it indicates that the disunity from 4 years ago never healed, and that there was a certain premature blessing of this marriage before the actual marriage.
It would be, George, really a diminished Reagan presidency, would it not?
It would be a diminished Reagan presidency, but you wouldn't get to that part, these people felt, because they were sitting up there imagining what great jolly fun the Carter campaign could have, portraying a president who had, for no apparent reason and under no particular necessity, given away so much of the essence of executive responsibility.
All right, George, what's happened on the floor, or what is happening on the floor right behind you and right below us is that Mr. Reagan has just been made the nominee of this party by acclamation, and Governor Reagan is now in the hall. He is below the platform, and he will be coming before these delegates in just a couple of minutes. You had mentioned before, George, that there were 5 points. You've mentioned one of them now. Are there any others about which you know?
I think those were, I think I probably mentioned 4, Ted, and didn't make them seriatim enough. They were positions in the government that would be at the disposal of Vice President Ford. Again, the question comes down as to how far this was pushed and who was behind pushing Ford. There's a great suspicion on the part of some of these people that the villain here was Henry Kissinger, and which would have made accepting it extremely doubtful just on those grounds.
Well, of course, he is a man that some of the folks here love to hate, George, but thank you very much for that late information, and that at least explains some of the confusion of the evening. Apparently, it looked very much like a Ford candidacy for vice president until just about a half an hour ago when, as George Will just said, the demands were rejected as being just too outrageous. And as George himself put it, he cannot swear to the fact that these are the precise demands that were made, but he has it on pretty good authority. Now let's go back down to the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, your nominee as President of the United States, Reagan.
They don't need any band to stir them up now.
Thank you very much. The delegates of this convention, you ladies and gentlemen, and those who are viewing, I know that I am breaking with precedent to come here tonight, and I assure you at this late hour I'm not going to give you my acceptance address tonight. I'll wait for the scheduled time. But in watching at the hotel the television and seeing the rumors that were going around and the gossip that was taking place here, I felt that it was necessary to break with tradition, just as probably in this campaign we're going to break with tradition a lot of times. Let me, as simply as I can, straighten out and bring this to a conclusion. It is true that a number of Republican leaders, people in our party, office holders, felt, as I'm sure many others have felt, that a proper ticket would have included the former President of the United States, Gerald Ford, as second place on the ticket. And it is true also that we have gone over this and over this and over this, and he and I have come to the conclusion, and he believes deeply, that he can be of more value as the former president campaigning his heart out, which he has pledged to do, and not as a member of the ticket. So, I respect him very much for the decision that he came to. He is loyal to this party and to this country. And he's told me that he and Betty will be there wherever they need to be in the campaign to help. I then believed that because of all of the talk and how something might keep going tonight, that it was time for me to advance the schedule a little bit. And I talked to a man we all know, and a man who was a candidate, a man who has great experience in government, and a man who told me that he can enthusiastically support the platform across the board. I have asked, and I am recommending to this convention, that tomorrow, when the session reconvenes, that George Bush be nominated. Thank you very much. McClure down there. Senator McClure. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have any more with the campaign? Do you have any more with the campaign? I mean, the convention? You don't? Shall I say good night? Yes. Okay. All right. Only have one more thing to say. It's past the witching hour. It's late. God bless you. Good night, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you very much.
Said he was going to break with tradition, and he certainly has. He's moved up the schedule, as he said, too.
And essentially, what Governor Reagan has done is to confirm at least part of what we've been telling you all evening, and that is that it looked very much as though they were negotiating for a Ford vice presidency, but that the negotiations broke down. Now, Jim Wooten is just out.
Are you happy with George Bush as a second choice, or is that a first choice for you?
Well, I think you can hardly say the former president has to be sort of in the running with the others. I think it was a very unusual thing.
Thank you, Governor.
And I think
right when you say.
How unusual is it?
Good work, Jim. Good work. Governor Reagan really wanted to stay and talk a bit. Did you notice that, Ted?
I did indeed. He was pulled away by one of his aides.
He was pulled away by Ed Meese, I believe.
Let's hear from Sam Donaldson on the floor.
Well, here I am with Governor Reagan behind the podium. Governor, I understand that you really wanted the former president on the ticket. Is that correct?
Well, I think a great many. And discussed, and I think the right decision was reached.
Well, did he ask you for certain conditions you just couldn't meet, or did he just say no to you?
Thank you, Governor. Thank you.
But you wanted it.
He just honestly felt that he could be of greater help.
What about George Bush? What kind of help is he? What the governor said was that George Bush would be tremendous help to him also. The gentleman?
All right.
I tend to disagree that the White House would have had trouble with this ticket had it gone through of Reagan and Ford. In the first place, if Reagan had given in to what we take to be Ford's demands, if they were real, what does that prove about Ronald Reagan and his power to run the White House and everybody who serves under him? Secondly, you could have run on a Democratic slogan of which Republican are you voting for president? I think the whole performance this evening for the last couple of days in allowing this Ford possibility to get out of hand has been Bush all the way from the start. And I don't mean that as a pun. It has been Bush, and I think it seriously brings into question how smooth the Reagan operation really is.